Welcome to All Voices. I have a special guest with me. He is state senator, right?
No, I was in the
Delegate.
House of Delegates and I ran for Senate this year.
House of Delegates. Thank you for correcting me.
Yeah.
House of Delegates member Joshua Higginbotham. Joshua, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Ray. I just really excited to be here on your show and can't wait to talk about the issues affecting minority communities in West Virginia and some of the solutions to try to help the entire state.
Thank you. Josh, before we get into this, please tell the audience something about Joshua Higginbotham.
Well, when I was first elected back in 2016 to the House of Delegates, I was the youngest state legislator in the entire country. And I certainly wasn't expecting to even win that election that year. But running a very competitive election, a very competitive campaign out of my dorm room at the University of Charleston was one heck of an experience. And I think every West Virginian should have the opportunity to volunteer for a campaign or to get involved politically. It's really the only way we can really make a difference. People often complain about politics or this state or the government in general, but refuse to do anything about it. And I'm trying to encourage young people and minority communities to get involved.
All right, let's get it started.
Great.
Joshua, prior to the election this past Tuesday, there was a situation that arose with Miss Andrea Kiesling.
Yes.
Yeah, she filed for candidacy. Come to find out that she was found not eligible. Who found out about that? And tell me, what were your thoughts when you found out that she was not eligible to run for office here?
Sure, that's a great question, Ray. And so she and I were both running for the 8th Senate District, which is Kanawha, Putnam, Jackson, Roane, and Clay counties in the state Senate. And let me be very clear, Andrea Kiesling is a lovely woman, even though we were opponents. We had some disagreements, but we were always very cordial. She is from Roane County originally. She grew up there, went to high school there, but right after she was educated here, she decided to move to North Carolina. That was more than 10 years ago. She's about 35 now, and raised a family there, had businesses registered there, her driver's license, vehicle registration, license plate, taxes, everything you can think of was in Charlotte, North Carolina. And there's nothing wrong with West Virginians coming back, and I support that 100%. She decided to come back in late 2021, and that's fantastic. She bought a property in Roane County, but then she decided on January 29th to register to vote in West Virginia and file to run for the state Senate the same exact day. And I encourage people to get involved politically, but the Constitution is very clear. You must reside in your district for 1 year before the election. She, I don't believe, made that deadline. And also, on top of that, this is the kicker, you must live and be a citizen of West Virginia for 5 years before you file to run for office, before you run for office. And she clearly was not. Just because she was born here does not make her a citizen of this state.
Let me jump in right there. Pause for a second, okay? So some say that, wait a minute, she's from Roane County. She grew up here. She went to high school here. That's 17, 18 years. So when you leave and then you come back, so then the West Virginia residency start over again, like from 1 to year 5? Is that how it works?
Yeah, according to the Constitution, and it's one word, it's immediately preceding the general election. So it's pretty clear. It's not just you have to have lived here 5 years at some point in your life. It is 5 years next preceding the election. And she had not. If she had moved here in 2016 or 2017, then she would have qualified. But it's really just that small phrase in the Constitution that that made it to where the circuit judge, the Secretary of State, and a unanimous decision by the Supreme Court ruled her ineligible.
Joshua Higginbotham is my guest. Josh, you raised a big stink among some people in your party. And again, thank you for coming on, because again, you are my first Republican legislator to come on my show. And again, I want to say thank you again for that.
Happy to do it, Ray.
So when we look at the backlash that you received, tell me, what were your thoughts? And if you want to name drop, go right ahead. But tell me your thoughts on the backlash that you received for basically blowing the whistle on this act.
Well, I was not the one who first addressed it. I heard it from at least a dozen people at the Capitol this past legislative session. Lobbyists, other legislators they came to me and they're like, Josh, she clearly has never voted here. So I first discovered, I didn't even think anything of it at first, but I first kind of began to piece it together when she filed in January 29th. That was the same day that I filed as well. And I simply Googled her. I looked her up on LinkedIn, and there was very little information about her in West Virginia. It was all about North Carolina. And I thought, well, maybe she lived down there for a while and there's just not a whole lot of history. Then I decided to look up her voter information a few weeks later, and she had never voted in a general election here before. So I called the Secretary of State's office and they confirmed it. But I said, she's clearly ineligible. What can be done about it? They said that the 15-day window from the time she filed to the time we made the discovery had already passed. That's that 15-day window that she can officially be removed from the ballot. And that deadline had passed. So the Secretary of State's office said, Joshua, the only way you can resolve this is to create a lawsuit, to take it to court. And I knew that there was a very large burden of proof that we had to make in order for it to be substantiated in court. And so we had to spend the next month and a half really gathering the evidence. And there was that's a very long story that will take 10 of these podcasts. But we finally found it out in kind of late April. We realized we found the smoking gun, and we decided to make it public. And that is exactly what we did. And a lot of people in my party were upset about it, but I think the majority of folks understand that we have to follow the Constitution above all else. That is the law of the land. And if we want to take an oath to swear our allegiance and our oath to the Constitution, then we should first read it and follow it ourselves.
Josh, even though that you and I, we are on both opposite ends of the political parties, and I'm sure our ideologies differ from each other. Looking at State Senate President Craig Blair, his comments about liberal judges, tell me, what were your thoughts about that? And do you feel that, was that an act of embarrassment to the Republican Party? Do you feel?
Well, I think, and I have tremendous respect for President Blair and the work that he's put in and organizing the Senate and passing good legislation. But his statement was, I believe, a bit unnecessary, because our Supreme Court has been put in place as that check and balance on the legislature, on the executive branch, which in this case was the Secretary of State, who had it wrong in determining her eligibility. And all 5 of our Supreme Court justices, 4 of whom are Republicans, one of which was actually the former Speaker of the House who worked with Senate President Craig Blair, all voted unanimously that she was ineligible. So this was not a matter of partisanship, because both sides of the aisle said that she clearly wasn't following the Constitution. And it was not her fault. Let me be clear. I don't blame her in any way. I mean, she's got kids that are 6 and I believe 2 and then a 12-week-old. So she just didn't know the law. She was misled by a number of political operatives who felt it was their prerogative to recruit someone to run against me and not share with her own ineligibility.
Now, you said there were a bunch of political operatives that put her up to run against you. Do you feel that this was an attempt to unseat you because, and you have admitted publicly that you're gay? Do you feel that's the reason why?
I do. I do. It has nothing to do with the policies or the beliefs that I hold. They made it pretty clear by running a pretty homophobic campaign that their intent was not to even win with Andrea. That's the thing. Her political operatives have been doing this, running campaigns longer than I've even been alive. I'm 25 years old now, and they're professionals. They know what they're doing. They knew that she had to live here for 5 years, and they knew she didn't. And so they took advantage of her, which is sad on their part. But they made it pretty clear that that was the reason. And I don't think that they even wanted any Republican to win so long as I did not. And for whatever reason, it scared them with the thought of having an openly LGBT Republican senator.
Josh, what is so crazy is I know that the GOP, you all stick together through thick and thin. You stick together no matter what. But this right here is, again, this is new territory. And when you came out announcing that you're gay, do you feel that it was a test to the Republican Party to say, okay, let's see how they're going to accept me? Will they accept me from who I am? Or before Ms. Keesling filed her papers, do you feel that they were going to accept you, or they were going to treat you like an outcast?
No, I felt, well, before I came out, I didn't know which way it would go. It was kind of 50-50. Either they'll accept me or they won't. But when I did come out, I probably had 80 plus members of the legislature personally call me, message me, email me. One of them wrote me a handwritten letter just congratulating me, saying they were proud of me, that they were happy for me. And knowing that this was certainly history making as the first openly LGBT Republican to not just in the legislature, but to ever hold office in our state's history. And I bear that title with great responsibility. So when I came out, the vast majority of them were supportive. Either they didn't care, they already knew, or they were supportive. And it was really only a handful of senators who felt that it was not necessary for me to do that, or then began to treat me differently. It was, again, only a handful. The vast majority were perfectly fine and didn't treat me any differently at all. And sadly, those were some of the same people who were running Miss Andrea Keesling. And that's their prerogative. If they don't want to support me for that reason, then legally there's nothing that can be done about that. But in a matter of morality, they decided to launch a personal attack, a personal campaign against me, with a candidate nonetheless that didn't even qualify. But to reiterate, the vast majority of Republican elected officials and candidates were completely supportive. It was just a handful that were not. Any
Democrats, officials?
Oh, yes.
Came across the aisle too? Okay.
Yes, it was, I would say, equal support among both sides. And of course, I'm not close with every elected official. There's 134 members of the legislature. I can only be friends with so many at a time. And so there were some that, just didn't care, which I think is the way it should be. It shouldn't matter. But again, it was the handful that were not okay with it, that I've had some concerns with and some trouble with.
Okay. Josh, your term will be up in December, is that correct?
So I actually stepped down a number of months ago because I moved to Kanawha County. So I'm actually not a current member of the legislature, but I have been the last 5 years. Okay. And yes, and so in running for Senate, I had to live in Kanawha County, and I had been planning on moving here anyways because I really like the Kanawha County public school system and hope to send my kids here one day. This was a long time coming. It just happened to be the same time that I was aspiring to run for state senate.
And you coming from Putnam County, is that correct?
Yeah, I moved about 3 miles. I'm originally from Kanawha County, born here, went to church here, went to school here, but I ended up living in Poca when I graduated from Poca High School, and I decided to move back to Kanawha County last year. And so, yeah, that's why I had to step down. I didn't live in my house district anymore.
Now, do you keep in contact with any elected officials now?
Oh, sure, absolutely. A lot of us go to the same campaign events. A lot of us have the same volunteers. We're all involved in the Republican executive committees at the county level, at the state level. We're all in the same social circle. And over the years, we've become friends with, many of us have become friends with each other. And of course, I still watched the legislative session this year, even though I wasn't there. I was still active and would offer advice and help promote some bills that I believe in here and there, even though I couldn't vote for any of them. I wish I could have, though, but I would in Kanawha County now.
Josh, talking politics now. One bill in particular, the anti-racism bill.
Mm-hmm.
It missed the midnight deadline back in the regular session. A lot of folks are in disagreement with the anti-racism bill. Please share your thoughts on that.
Well, let me first of all stipulate that this is not something like critical race theory ban. Critical race theory is a course taken at the graduate level for law students, it is currently not being taught in our K-12 system because it is a graduate level course, and I don't think graduate level courses are at the same learning level of K-12 students. I didn't actually read the bill. Again, I was not in the legislature at the time. Could you tell me a little bit? I saw some articles about it. Could you tell me just slightly what was in it? I know it was something about they didn't want to make students feel uncomfortable on a part of their race. Is that what it was?
Right. It was a matter of basically, some would say, teaching Black history will make some white folks feel uncomfortable because we're looking at oppression and segregation and things as far as things what took place back in history. So the bill was that teachers cannot teach it because, again, it made some white folks feel uncomfortable. So part of that was there was like a whistleblowing technique to where if the child was being introduced to Black history and they go home and tell their parents, there was supposed to be like a toll-free, like a hotline that they could call in and report it to the powers that be that this particular teacher taught Black history to their kids.
So, just at the face value of that, again, having not read the bill itself, we need to teach Black history. We need to teach all American history. Slavery was the gravest of sins in our nation's history. And I believe we're still atoning for that sin, even 160 years later. We have to teach the history of things like what happened in Oklahoma City. We have to teach the history of Rosa Parks and Dr. King, and also talk about some of the issues facing the African-American community today. These are very, very critical stories that need to be shared. I was a history major at the University of Charleston, as well as a political science major. And I understand that history is not always pleasant. It's not always something that makes us comfortable. And it shouldn't, because all societies, all cultures have made those grave sins like our country has. And it is our job as American citizens to learn that history. Otherwise, as we all know, we are doomed to repeat it.
Josh, do you recall the gentleman, probably a year or two ago, gentleman, he got arrested at the Capitol because he had guns in the car. He had a list of elected officials in his car. Do you recall that story?
At the U.S. Capitol?
At the U.S. Capitol, yes.
I remember on January 6th, there was a guy with a gun and I think bomb-making materials across the street from the Capitol. I guess it was between the Supreme Court and the Capitol. Is that the same guy that you're referring to?
He's from West Virginia.
Oh, I believe I remember this story. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I had him on my podcast and we discussed this, and he and I would go back and forth, and I'll say Black history, and he keeps saying anti-racism, and I keep trying to point out to him, you cannot teach Black history without teaching racism. It's impossible.
Right. And
I tried to explain that to him, and I came at him different ways, tried to get him to understand, but he was being who he is. So that's that. So Josh, the word is out that the anti-racism bill will come up again in the next interim session. And some say that is a great possibility that this is going to pass. Tell me your thoughts on that.
Well, as I said, history makes people uncomfortable, and it should. And we have to teach all aspects of it. Now, there is, as with all textbooks, as with all content, there is a matter of it being age appropriate. Is it appropriate to show a kindergartner, a riot or a lynching or something? I mean, they can understand the concept of it, perhaps, but I think they need to be introduced to the history of this country and the violence and the racism that has been perpetrated against minority communities for a very long time. So I think it's a matter of age appropriateness, not so much a matter of what makes them uncomfortable, feel that they are inferior because of their race. We shouldn't make anyone feel uncomfortable or I'm sorry, inferior because of the color of their skin. But that doesn't necessarily mean we shouldn't teach history at all. So we'll see what the final result of the bill is. They say that the process of making a law is like making sausage. Nobody likes to see how the sausage is made because everybody's putting something in it that at the end of the day will probably make everybody angry, but that's how the process is. And hopefully they can come up with an effective compromise that doesn't put a gag on teachers, that doesn't put one arm tied behind their back, allows them the freedom to teach, but also doesn't teach something that is age inappropriate. Hopefully that compromise can be found.
Josh, when we talk about the Republican Party here in West Virginia, again, you talk about, and correct me if I'm wrong, when we talk about the Republican Party, we talk about conservatism. We talk about fiscal spending. The core values of the Republican Party. Is that the norm now? Because now it's like it's gone crazy in my belief. Tell me, what happened to the Republican Party?
Well, my fear is that the rise of populism has created these culture war issues that are just flashpoints for the base of the Republican Party. And I'm a big tent kind of guy. I want as many people who have liberty and freedom-minded conservative values to join the Republican Party as possible. But at what point do we say somebody who has issues with minority communities, does that mean that they should be welcomed in the party? Does it mean that somebody who stormed the Capitol steps on January 6th, does that mean they should be welcomed in the party? Someone who got caught beating a police officer on the Capitol steps? What about somebody who made threats to elected officials, or things like that? And we as a party have to find that line and draw it in the sand. What are we willing to do? Look, I'm a gun owner. I'm an avid hunter and a sportsman. And a lot of people don't support the Second Amendment, but the majority of West Virginians, I think, do. I think the vast majority of us do. And so I think there are universal principles, universal ideals that most Republicans can get behind. And when I went door to door campaigning earlier this year, a lot of people didn't like these culture war issues. They wanted their roads fixed. They want broadband. They want to make sure that their kids and grandkids have school choice, whether they choose to private school, homeschool their students, or send them to a good quality public school. And I'm a byproduct of the public school system, so I can attest to that. They want to make sure that their taxes are low, or at least fair, and that government isn't out of control. So I think that the majority of Republican voters are in line with those values that I just described. But for some reason, certain leaders within the party, certain elected officials at the state level, maybe even local level, have become so attentive to this radical base of people, because they're not the majority, but they're the loudest voices in the room. And that is a mistake that is often made in politics. We aren't listening to what the people actually want and what the needs of our constituents are. We are only listening to the people who are screaming the loudest. And I've always said, if someone cries and shouts at the sky over spilled milk, then they're not even worth addressing and arguing with at all, because they are just looking for a fight and nothing else.
Josh, yeah, because see, here's my thought. You're all about fiscal spending. Great, fine. Core family values. Great, fine. But then when we look at 4 years of Donald Trump, and I don't want to know, I'm not going to ask you whether you are a supporter of Trump. I don't want to know. If you choose to say it, say it. Has his brand of politics really overtaken the state of West Virginia? Because think about this right here. When you talk about conservative fiscal spending, Donald Trump ran up $8 trillion of debt in 4 years.
Yeah.
And folks will say, oh, he's doing a great job. Mm-hmm. He said he's going to bring back coal. Mm-hmm. I don't see it. He's all about the coal miners. Well, his administration cut Black lung benefits in half. So, I mean, the party has gone that extreme. If I'm wrong, please jump in and say it.
So it's important to remember the context of the last year and a half of the president's time in office. Of course, we had the pandemic, and we had no choice but to spend trillions and trillions of dollars and ring up the national debt, particularly in a time when the economy was down and therefore tax revenue was also down. But that's a minority of the deficit that we ran, of the debt that we rang up. And it ultimately came down to we cut taxes, which I supported. I supported the 2017 tax cuts, but we did not curb the spending. And that's where I had issues. And I think a lot of people had issues, because Reagan, sadly, and I'm a fan of Reagan in most aspects, but Reagan did the same thing. They did tax cuts, and he worked with a Democratic Congress. Don't get me wrong, he worked with them, but they failed to pass spending cuts as well. And here in West Virginia, we in the legislature have been dedicated to passing a flat budget over the last couple of years, and for at least the next 3 years. There is a continual increase in revenue over time due to inflation, due to an expanding economy, whatever reason that might be. And as long as we keep a flat budget at a state level, it will allow us to make those tax cuts without making comparatory spending cuts. At the federal level, they haven't done that. They did tax cuts, but they continue to spend more and more money even before COVID. And I imagine they will continue to do so even after COVID. But if they adopted the same policy that the West Virginia legislature adopted by passing well, at the federal level, it's a concurrent resolution. It's not a budget per se, but essentially a flat budget, then it will allow the economy to grow at the rate it needs to where it'll catch up with our spending and hopefully get the debt under control.
So when you look at the increase in revenue for the state, what are the plans with that revenue that we're getting? What are the plans for it?
Well, there's a few different plans. I think the one that most Republicans agree on is the eventual, gradual, or immediate elimination of the income tax. How we do that, there's 100 different plans. Every delegate has one. There's 34 different plans over in the Senate, I'm sure. And I think that that's something that Republicans all agree on in a general way, but it's how do we do it? Does that mean increasing the sales tax? Does that mean things like legalizing marijuana, which is one of the things that I'm in favor of as a revenue stream? Does it mean increasing property taxes, or at least creating a statewide property tax system as opposed to a county one? There's 100 different ideas out there, and I think that is the consensus among Republicans, is that's what we want to use the surplus for. Yes, we've passed 3 different public employee, teacher, and police pay raises over the last 5 years, and we need to do more. But we still have to pay for some of these things if we want to attract young people and working families to the Mountain State. We think that eliminating the income tax is one of the most efficient ways of doing that.
Josh, I mean, I believe it's gonna be kind of hard to eliminate the income tax. It's gonna be very hard. Now, given the fact that we're one of the poorest states in the nation. So please dumb it down for some folks.
Mm-hmm.
How is the revenue being generated?
So currently, I think it's around half of West Virginia's revenue comes from the income tax, and the other half is the sales tax. At the local or county level, it's through property taxes, and in some towns and cities, it's a municipal sales tax. So they have a 1% sales tax called the Home Rule program, and so by eliminating the income tax, there goes half of our revenue. That's half our budget. It's like $2 billion. So how do we make that up? We either make cuts, which that's probably unrealistic to cut half the budget, or we increase the sales tax. Right now it's at 6%. For every percent you increase it, that's hundreds of millions of dollars of additional revenue. The majority of our sales tax is currently paid by West Virginians, but it's only a slight majority. It's something like 40-some% is paid by out-of-state West Virginians, whether it's them buying something at a gas station or crossing the Ohio River and going to Walmart or Target or Kroger or whatever. And so we have to realize that if we increase it by up to maybe to 8% or even 9%, that is more than enough for us to eliminate the income tax 100%, which is something that almost half of West Virginians pay. So by eliminating it, on average, the average West Virginia family would save an additional 5 or 6% of their total earnings, but then offsetting that by paying an additional 2 or 3% in sales tax. So overall, net, they would essentially be having a 2 or 3% pay raise immediately.
So, okay, you say one option is increase the sales tax.
Mm-hmm.
Why not legalize marijuana?
Sure, and I'm an advocate for that. Personally, I don't care what people do, but I think that if they're going to do it, they should do it safely, legally, and they should pay taxes on it. From what I've heard, we could raise up to $100 million a year on it if we act quickly and be one of the first in our region to do so. Pennsylvania is right about to do it, complete legalization. DC's already done it, but if we end up doing it early and we act fast, we could be the Colorado of the East. And this is the libertarian in me. This is not a liberal position. This is libertarianism. And
okay,
that's my view.
yeah.
I've seen estimates up to $250 million a year, and perhaps that could be the difference in an 8% sales tax as opposed to a 9% sales tax. And then we have to take into account our public spending, our spending, and so that flat tax that I mentioned, or that flat budget that I mentioned, we're constitutionally obligated to pass a budget every year. That's the only thing the legislature technically is required to do. We do a lot more than that. But if we do that flat budget, the economy will grow naturally to the point where people will be paying more in sales tax, even if the rate remains the same, because they'll have more money in their pockets due to inflation, and they'll be purchasing more stuff. Or the value of the products that they're buying will increase, and therefore they'll pay out more in sales tax, even if the percent stays the same. So it comes down to what cuts can we make? Can we make a flat budget? Can we pass marijuana early enough? And at what level sales tax do we need to have in order to make sure that we eliminate the income tax without hurting impoverished families in our state?
Josh, I have a few more questions, and we'll let you go.
Mm-hmm.
So let's look at Roe v. Wade.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you care to share your thoughts? If you don't want to, just say next question.
Sure. No, I'm happy to, Ray. Well, first of all, let me state that any leak of any decision by the Supreme Court is unheard of, and it is unconscionable. Whether Justice Alito wrote an opinion in favor of keeping Roe v. Wade, or eliminating Roe v. Wade, or repealing Roe v. Wade, or overturning it, I guess, it should never have been leaked. That was a breach of our judicial branch. Our judiciary is supposed to be unbiased and fair. So regardless of how the decision played out, it should not have been leaked. And that was wrong. If it was a clerk that did that, or one of the justices, it was just wrong. So let me start with that. I do believe that Roe v. Wade should be replaced with something else. Whether certain exemptions be written into law or not, I would support that at a state level or even a federal level, preferably federal. But I think that there are some states that would not enact something like that. I generally don't like it when social issues go through the Supreme Court. They are unelected justices that are deciding these hot button issues for millions of Americans, hundreds of millions of Americans. And so that's why I think action like this should go through the legislative branch of government, through Congress. As a pro-life conservative, I'll tell you that I do have exceptions on the basis of rape, incest, the mother's life being in danger, and the viability of the child. People don't often realize this. Women who sadly have to carry a deceased child or a nearly deceased child are suffering. I mean, they know that the child is not viable. And this is something that nobody really talks about. It's this fourth exception to abortion. So I have those exceptions, which cover the majority of abortions in this country right now. Those issues, whether it's issues with pregnancy, the viability of the fetus, that is a majority of abortions in this country, and I believe that should be codified into law. So, long story short, we do need to get rid of Roe v. Wade and replace it with something else in the law that is a bit more restrictive.
Can the state legislature come up with a law, just what you said, to codify Roe v. Wade? Can it create something to where no matter what the U.S. Supreme Court say, this is state law here, or does federal law supersede state law?
Well, federal law always supersedes state law. That's the supremacy clause in our Constitution. It's pretty clear that we must submit any law to be superseded by the feds. That's standard practice. We could do it at the state level, but I would imagine, given the enormity of this, I imagine that Congress would get around to it first. I know recently we saw a failed vote in the Senate, but Joe Manchin, being the negotiator that he is, he said that he was open to certain negotiations for this, to certain talks on it. He helped with the infrastructure bill. That was huge. And I think that if Manchin gets involved and really pulls his weight, they can do it at a federal level, because it does appear at the surface that Roe v. Wade will be overturned by the Supreme Court.
Last question. I'm sorry, Governor Justice said this right here. Mick Bates, State Senator Mick Bates said this right here. I didn't leave the party left me. Do you feel that when you came out as openly gay, do you feel that the party left you? Because again, they were hell-bent on trying to unseat you. You won the lawsuit and you lost against Mark Hunt.
Yeah.
Do you feel disrespected now?
Two years ago, I was a member of the Energy Committee in the House of Delegates. And I had to sit beside, for 2 years prior to that, a gentleman by the name of Delegate Eric Porterfield, who said that if his children ever came out as gay, that he would drown them. He used different derogatory terms in committee meetings, in public, in the media. What isn't public is the comments he would often say to me, sitting in committee, just privately leaning over and saying different things. And at the time, I hadn't even come out to my parents yet. Most of my family knew, but my parents did not. And when nothing was done about it, I actually went down to the Secretary of State's office, just on the other side of the building, and I filled out a voter registration form that made me an independent. Because on the issues of taxes, the economy, education, Second Amendment, I could never be a Democrat. But my ability to become a husband and a father is paramount to me. That there is nothing more I want in life than to be a husband and a father. So that was a very difficult moment. Later that day, I gave that paper to Speaker of the House, Roger Hanshaw, and I tore it up right in front of him, because he made a speech that said that this is not the kind of language that Republicans should be using. And the majority of my caucus agreed. I don't believe that the Republican Party left me, because I believe that the Republican Party is changing. 10 years ago, it would not have been possible for a Republican to even come out of the closet in West Virginia and be accepted. The majority of my caucus, the majority of members of my party did accept me. It was just a handful of very powerful, very wealthy senators and operatives who chose not to. And sadly, it was this handful of very powerful people who swayed my election enough to where I lost by about 700 votes. It was, it shouldn't have been like that. People don't often realize how far the Republican Party has come in such a short period of time. 10 years ago, when I was a freshman, 14-year-old in high school, I saw a poll from Fox News that said 20% of Americans who are registered Republicans support gay marriage, 20%. And I knew, being someone who was interested in Republican politics, I could never come out. Same thing with members of my family. And then they took the same poll in 2020, and it said 55% of registered Republicans in our country now support gay marriage. So think about that. Over a 10-year period, it went from 20% of Republicans supported it to 55%. A majority of my party does. Imagine how far we're going to be in 5 years. Imagine those elected officials here in West Virginia who came to me after I publicly came out and said, Joshua, we had no idea about you. And you were the first openly gay person we've ever actually gotten to know and become friends with. So no, I don't think my party left me. I think my party is moving along very rapidly, not as rapidly as I would like. I'd like for them to fully embrace me and understand the fact that I'm going to start a family in the near future. But I think that we have to recognize the progress that has been made and understand our place in that progress and where we're going to be in the next few years. So that's really all I have to say about that.
Now, Josh, now again, going opposite ends of the spectrum, of the political spectrum here. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a Democrat. There's nothing wrong.
No.
Nothing wrong, yeah. I sleep good at night.
Right.
Being a Democrat. Yeah, I sleep good. Final word. I'm gonna give you 1 minute to get, like I said, give you the final word, speak your thoughts, anything and everything that you want to talk about.
Sure.
Ready?
Sure.
Go.
So again, I'm Joshua Higginbotham. I'm grateful to be on the show today. As an openly LGBT Republican in West Virginia, I can tell you that my party is changing. Like I just said earlier, my party embraced me when I came out publicly. And I believe that we are moving forward on the issues of race, on the issues of sexism, on the issues of homophobia. And it's going to take time and patience. And we have to have these kind of conversations and be willing to sit down cordially and civilly with one another, just like we've done over the last hour, to really move the needle. Because you'll find at the end of the day, we have far more in common than we have that separates us and that divides us. And we as a country should no longer be polarized. We should understand that in order to work towards the goal that we want to be at, we have to work together and have these kind of conversations. So I just wanted to say thank you to Ray for hosting this podcast and inviting a Republican to be part of it.
Joshua Higginbotham, thank you very much for coming to Our Voices. You take care, be safe, okay?
Thank you, Ray.
Don't go anywhere. Hold on.